Hey, how you doing? Justin here. Today we're going to be talking about strumming without a pick. It's something I get asked about a whole lot. It's kind of a big subject really. For most beginners, I think they tend to turn to it because they can't use a pick. And I don't think that's the right option. If you're struggling to use a pick, I think you want to try using a very thin pick and struggle with it a little bit longer, because I think for real beginners, it's a bit easier and better in the long term to be able to strum with a pick. However, when I'm strumming the guitar, more than 50% of the time I choose to strum without a pick. Now, there's a lot more options when you choose to strum without a pick, as well as in the ways that you do it. When you strum with a pick, most people tend to hold the pick the same way, they move the arm the same way. There's kind of a lot more, it's not limited, but there seems to be one way that works for most people most of the time. Whereas when you take that away and you're using your hand, there's a lot more options as to how you angle your fingers on the strings, whether you use your thumb or your finger or a combination of those things, how much you move your arm, how much you move your thumb or your fingers independently of the arm. There's a lot more options. And I think that's one of the reasons why I kind of prefer it, because you can get a lot more tonal variations. There's a bit more to think about. So this video is for beginners to explore playing without a pick, if you don't want to play without a pick for whatever reason, and for more intermediate and advanced guitar players to get some ideas on ways of exploring playing without a pick. So it's kind of multiple levels here, and hopefully beginners will find it kind of interesting, and it'll give you hopefully the right idea of finding a way that works well for you, because I think that's one of the key things here, is finding the way that works best for you. So I'm going to start by talking about using your thumb. Now, when you're strumming with your thumb, if you just strum down with your thumb, you get the fleshy part of the thumb quite obviously, right? It's quite a round sound compared to if I use a pick. It's kind of louder and a bit brighter. So if I use my thumb, it's a little bit rounder, a little bit fuller. I'm not sure that the brightness is sometimes good when you're recording, but not all the time, so I don't think that that's necessarily an advantage. It's just a bit different. When you do an up strum, if you're just going to use your thumb, there's a couple of options and things that you need to be aware of, depending on how you angle your hand. So if you keep your thumb kind of the palm flat with the guitar when you use your thumb, it can kind of hook up under the strings and get caught and get a little bit uncomfortable. So it's worth realizing that when you strum up, you want the thumb to be a little bit more kind of facing, it needs to be at an angle where it's not hooking. So you need to explore a bit how that works and how that feels with your thumb, so that it's not hooking under the strings, that the angle of your thumb isn't going to cause it to get trapped and go all kind of weird when you're strumming up with the thumb. So that's the first thing, is just to think about it. Now generally, I think rather than the thumb kind of pointing up like that, it wants to be kind of think that way a little bit for the up strum. Okay, just a little bit, doesn't have to be a lot. So that's the first thing to think about, is just be aware when you're strumming with your thumb, how is it angled against the strings, and is it going to hook in? Is either the bit of the flesh where it meets the nail can hook in, or the whole angle of the thumb could kind of throw you in? I mean, you shouldn't be like that. You want to keep your wrist nice and close to the strings, I think, for the thumb thing. But again, there's some different options I'll talk about in a second. So that's the first thing just to be aware of, is trying to find a way that it doesn't hook into the strings. Now, because you've got a nail on the top of your thumb, it's possible to get a fleshy sound on the down and a naily sound on the up, which is obviously brighter. So flesh, bright, fresh. Now that feels a little bit weird for me like that. I'm having to consciously kind of drag my nail on the strings. I find that if I keep my hand a little flatter, that I can still get the fleshy part. It's kind of the fleshy part underneath my thumb that's doing the strum, not the nail like that, the fleshy part. Now, because generally you don't probably want the up strums to be bright and the down strums to be muted like this. It just sounds a little bit kind of wonky to my ear, I think to most people probably. So if you're going to strum with just your thumb, I'd recommend just mainly working on that fleshy part and trying to get it so it's even like that. See, there's not really a big accent there on the up strums. With the nail I can do it, but it sounds a makes it sound a little bit wonky. So I'd recommend just thinking about the flesh. Now, when it comes to the motion of the arm there, you can use, just keeping all your fingers kind of nice and open and relaxed, you can move your whole arm just like you would if you were doing strumming with a plectrum. But you could also, there are some guys that kind of put their fingers on the actual guitar and just strum with the thumb motion itself. Now, neither of those ones is particularly more valid than the other one. It's just what feels comfortable for you. There's no way that you should feel one way is superior other than what's working for the song and what's working for the person playing. And I think this is where it gets into slightly more complicated for beginners, because I think for a beginner it's a bit easier to know what's right. And when you're using a pick, as I said, there tends to be more one way to do it. So there's the right way of doing it, mostly. Of course, it's not quite that black and white, but there's mostly the right way to do it, and then ways that are maybe not so good. But with this fingers thing, there's a few more options, and therefore it can get a little bit more complicated, and beginners might feel a little bit, well, I'm not sure I'm doing it right. And the test, I guess, to see if you're doing it right for you is if it feels nice to you, if it sounds nice. Because that's the two most important things. It needs to sound nice to you and to other people, and it wants to feel nice and comfortable and relaxed. You don't want it to feel all complicated and difficult. That's not the point. It should feel comfortable. So you need to explore a little bit. First of all, the angle of your thumb, how you're going to play, whether you want it to be all fleshy or fleshy and nail. Unlikely you're going to want that, but you might do. And then think about whether you want to try and keep the whole arm moving, or whether you just want to think about using your thumb, or a mixture. So maybe your arm moves a little bit and your thumb's moving as well. It's not one or the other. There's combinations here that you can explore, and you shouldn't feel like you have to do one or the other. Okay, so that'll be playing with the thumb. It's one of my favourite personally. I like playing with the thumb a lot, particularly with the fleshy thing if I'm doing a little ballad or something that's a bit, mellower. I like the feeling of the strings on the flesh of my fingers as well. I like that. It's nice. Strumming with a pick, of course, is something I do a lot as well, and there's definite advantages to that. The crispness and the brightness, and particularly if you're playing with a band, it can be a big advantage. But there's lots of other advantage here, with the fingers thing as well, which we're going to get into now. So that's talking about the thumb on its own. Now, the other option is quite a common one, is using your first finger on its own. Now, if you're going to strum with your first finger, if you strum down, you're most likely to get this, use the nail part of your first finger. And then on the up pick, you tend to use the fleshy part of the finger. So you get nail, flesh, nail, flesh. Now, that's kind of more musical than to have the nail on the 1, 2, 3 and the 4 and the fleshy part on the and. So that would be normally 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and if you were strumming on every beat. Now, if you're going to do that, you're going to find with the up strum again, you need to be aware of the position so that your finger doesn't kind of hook into the strings, right? So it needs to be kind of pointing up. So down and then up. It's going to be, pointing at the ground for the upstroke, and then you're going to curl your finger a little bit for the down. It's kind of, if I try and slow it right down. Now this approach, doing it like this with my first finger, like this, I'm not tending to make a big motion with my arm. I can do. We'll talk about another option for that in a sec. But the finger strummy sort of thing, it's very much kind of up and down, and it's nail on the way down and finger on the way up. Now, if you don't want that difference in dynamic between the nail and the finger, you can also use the flesh of your first finger. So this way you're keeping your hand a lot flatter. Instead of it this way, up and down this way, you think of it a bit more that way. Now this is very soft and delicate, so I would only ever use this as kind of a ballady kind of thing. It's lost all of the top end. It's not very bright. It's soft. It's hard to get like a big dynamic range, like the range between how loud and how soft you can be. But it's quite nice and delicate as well. So there might be times where that kind of thing. Now see, I still want to, occasionally I want to be hitting the nail to get it a little bit more crunchy, but definitely there have been occasions where I've been using mainly the little fleshy, using the finger pointy thing. Now, The other option that's very common for just playing with fingers is to hold your finger together like you're holding a pick. So you pretend that you're holding a pick, but the pick becomes your first finger. Okay, so that way it's quite a nice one again for beginners. If you're playing or you dropped your pick, you're used to the technique, you should practice a little bit, just putting your fingers together like you're holding a pick. Now, straight away, I'm more into moving my arm like I would when I'm playing with a pick. Okay, so pivoting from the elbow, trying to move the whole forearm up and down together. Okay, so it's much more, it feels like more of a strum if I go into just holding my first finger and my thumb together like it's a pick. It's not actually any different to just using your first finger, because you're not using your thumb, but there's something about gripping it together. It makes it a little bit more solid, it gives it a little bit more volume. Again, the things that you want to be aware of is just, particularly for the up strum, making sure that you're not hooking into the string. So that'll just be experimenting with the angle of your first finger. You don't want it pointing kind of up into the strings. You want it like pointing directly in, or even a little bit kind of first finger pointing slightly toward the ground to avoid that kind of getting hooked up there. So all of these things are all a little bit different. There's not a right or a wrong. You can use your thumb by itself. You can use the thumb and then a bit of the nail on the up strums, or just the flesh of the thumb. You can use just your first finger. You can have it going up and down like that. You can strum your whole hand and use the fleshy pad of the first finger. You can hold your thumb and your first finger together. But there's even more options than that, right? So that's just a starting point. Another really, really common one is to use your thumb on the bass note, so usually on beat 1 and beat 3, and then use your first finger for doing a little down and up strum. So you have this 1, 2, and 3, and 4. 1, 2, and 3, and 4. So thumb, down, up with the first finger, thumb, up, down. Thumb, down, up with the first finger, thumb, up, down with the first finger. 1, 2, and 3, and 4. 1, 2, and 3, and 4. For example, there's lots of different patterns that you could use, but this is just one. There's infinite number of patterns that you can get into if you start exploring that as an option. But that again is a really, really common kind of starting point, the idea of having the bass note with a nice round, fleshy thumb sound, and then that down strum with the first finger where you're using the pick. You know, it's called playing on the backbeat, which is the beat 2 and 4, when they're accented a little bit. This 2, 3, and 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's emulating the snare drum from a drummer. So you get that do, ga, do, ga, do, 2, 3, and 4, 1, 2. So having that 1, 2, 3, and 4, 1, 2, 3, and 4. It's a really, really nice little option, something that, again, you don't have to. You would likely pick a little harder on beats 2 and 4 if you were playing with a pick, but if you're playing with your fingers, you think about ways of dealing with that. So you're using the thumb on the 1 and 3 and the down hit with the first finger on beats 2 and 4 is quite a nice little option. Now, last thing I want to talk about is the mixing of all of that together, and that's probably one of the things that I like most about playing with fingers as opposed to a pick, is this being able to mix up the strummy part with the fingerstyley part. You know, one of my favorite guitar players in the world is Neil Young, and he's an expert at doing that. The way he combines little melody elements within the strumming, it's kind of like strumming and fingerstyle, and you can get a bit percussive and all of that sort of stuff all at the same time. It's not for beginners. I wouldn't recommend beginners jump into trying to do this, because it's way more complicated. But just to give you a kind of a taste of what's going on, the idea would be along the lines of what I was talking about before, where you'd have this bass note playing on beat 1 and 3, little strum in between. So you get into a kind of a bit where you can kind of do fingerstyle within the strumming and keep the strumming going at the same time. That's the longer term goal, I think, if you're going to pursue the fingerstyley finger strumming, is to be able to incorporate those things if you feel you need to. Now, more is not always better. Sometimes it's better just to keep the strumming real simple. It depends on what the song needs, not what you fancy doing. Okay, that's a really important thing to realize, is that you should be playing for the song, not just for your, to show off what techniques that you've got. So always kind of bear that in mind. What's the song that you're playing? How does it feel good? Is it a ballad? Is it a up-tempo thing? How should it feel? What's the best way to deliver a particular piece? So to summarize, for beginners, I would recommend, if you don't want to use a pick for whatever reason, you get into using your thumb, the fleshy part of your thumb, and just get into using a little bit of arm motion, a little bit of thumb. Try and get used to making sure that the thumb doesn't catch on anything. So just that, thinking about the angle, just take it slowly and see if you can notice if something's going wrong. If you're getting one of the strums is too loud, or you're getting a bit of nail, or it's just poking out funny, or for whatever reason it doesn't feel right. Try and become an observer of yourself rather than trying to concentrate on getting it right. Try and watch yourself do it as an impartial observer, just out of curiosity, and then kind of try to make the mistake. Because then if you're watching like that as an observer and you do make the mistake, you've got a good chance of figuring out what went wrong. And if you can figure out what's gone wrong, you've got a way of fixing it. But remember that with this fingerstyle thing, there's not so many rules. I don't really get into this idea that there's one way to do it and that's the right way, and this guy says that you should do this and another guy says you should do that. I don't really think that's right for fingerstyle. I've seen a lot of different amazing artists and amazing musicians play all kinds of different ways, and I think that's a good thing, to be able to explore and find your own way, your own path in the musical journey, because that's where you'll find yourself and your most enjoyment and your expression. No, that's getting a bit arty-farty for beginners. You just want to learn to strum, right? So if you're that guy, keep it simple. If you're a more advanced guitar player, try exploring all of these different options. Try exploring different fingers, different ways of doing it. Of course, we're not getting into the full-on, percussive fingerstyle options, because when we get into that, there's like 100,000 different ways of doing it. But this should give kind of beginners and intermediate guitar players a taste of the different things that they might want to explore if they don't want to use a pick. I really hope you found this lesson very helpful, and if you did, really appreciate you subscribing to my channel, so hit that subscribe button. Remember, there's lots of additional notes over on the website as well. There'll be a link in the description to go and check that out. I'll see you for plenty more very soon. You take care of yourselves. Thanks. Bye-bye.